Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Uncensored CMO. Now, hard as it is to believe, this is actually my 150th edition of the podcast. Can't quite believe I've got to this point, but I have. It's been an amazing journey. Now, what better way to celebrate 150 episodes than to get our most returned guest back on, Orlando Wood, the Grand Fromage himself, and the legend that is Sir John Hegarty, iconic founder of BBH. And we're going to get back to talk about their Can Talk, the next creative revolution, why they believe a creative revolution is necessary for the industry and what they are doing about it. This is a great talk. We cover so much ground. It's a lot of fun. I know you'll love it. Here it is. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Lovely to be here. Lovely to be here.
Well, this does seem appropriate, doesn't it?
It does. It's fantastic. And I'm with Orlando, who's been on more times than anybody else, which is actually... He is the Judi Dench of the Graham Norton show.
Well, I know. We discussed this before, weren't we? We had to do some research, didn't we, to find out who is the most returned guest on Graham Norton. And it turns out to be Judi Dench.
But I can assure you, Orlando does not look like her at all. Although we could describe him as a sort of an advertising treasure, couldn't we? I think
he has a similar moral authority.
Yes. I've always described him as a cross between a vicar and a professor, and someone whose word you can trust.
Well, that's very important, isn't it?
It's incredibly when you're imparting information. Do I believe this person? Well, I certainly believe Orlando. I mean,
Well, so when they publish the advertisers are less trustworthy than politicians, I feel like going, but we've got Orlando Wood, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly.
Come on, how on earth can you get to this conclusion?
We've been knocked off bottom spot, though, haven't we?
This is true.
Advertising has been knocked off bottom spot by media and politicians.
It took the worst performing Tory government in history to do it.
It took Boris Johnson to actually, who's lied more in his life than almost any other person in the world, to actually elevate us off the bottom. Great.
Well, there we go. Well, thank you, Judi and Sir John, for coming back.
Well, it's a pleasure.
It's great to see you.
Could you just raise your voice slightly?
Yes. We'll get into it.
Yeah.
Well, we're here to talk about advertising, and I think I might have just seen the most effective ad of all time last week, which is the Oasis announcement. I mean, talk about one ad. So it was one post, and it didn't even have the branding in it. It just had the date, right? And that has been well. Searches for Oasis went up 9,000%. Wembley's been sold 5 times. And in fact, even this morning, there's been an announcement there's going to be new dates added as well. And they're projecting Oasis will get 400 million in revenue just from this tour over the next year. I mean,
of course, they really need the cash. So we all know what it's about, don't we? I think. I could be sued for that probably. But anyway, I've just said it. But I do, what I think is interesting about that is, we live in a world of advertising and we talk about marketing and we talk about all these things. And I was just thinking the other day, actually, about the Taylor Swift, which is her tour has just come to an end. And I'm not in any way a Taylor Swift fan. I don't listen to her music, download her tracks or anything like that. But I just think she's remarkable. And I wonder, when she's kind of working out the tour, does she ever say to all her colleagues, right now, chap, that's very good, we've got the music, now what's the marketing strategy? Do you think she ever says that? Or do you think she just goes, we're going to write some brilliant music, we're going to perform like this, and all of a sudden she's got an amazing product?
Yeah.
And she doesn't obsess about marketing. She obsesses about the quality of what it is she's doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting about whether you like Oasis or not. Obviously, they have a huge, huge following. The other thing that's incredible about Oasis, so you've got this, they don't talk about marketing, and they're things that people want, people want to, be a part of. The other incredible thing I think about Oasis is that it's cross-generational. We talk about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen F, Gen H, I, J, K, W, X, Y, Z. I got no idea. And here's Oasis. They've got, 15-year-olds desperate to go. They've got, 45-year-olds desperate to go, wherever all they are. And you just go, most of what we talk about in marketing is bullshit.
Yeah.
It's just bullshit. And it moves us away from the real issue, which is, are you making something great? And would not people like that? Yeah. Would they like that? And I think I think the Oasis thing is just remarkable.
But another interesting thing about it is, do you remember at the time, they were quite criticised by all the music critics because the music was a little bit simple. And again, it's a bit like that with advertising. We get very sort of, in our own sort of, wound up in our own intellectualizing of it. But actually what Oasis done is done something very popular.
Do something popular.
It gets in your head. The lyrics don't even make any sense,
Yeah.
but they're memorable and they're hummable, as you would say, and impossible to get out of your head.
A great advertising copywriter, Theodore McManus, his famous ad, "The penalty of leadership ends, what deserves to live lives." Craft and entertaining the populace is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It lasts.
I think they write anthems.
Yeah.
And I think there is something about an anthem that kind of elevates everybody and everybody wants to join in, as opposed to sit back and go, "Oh, that's very interesting." And I think that's what they did, and they did that brilliantly. I think U2 do it as well.
Coldplay
U2 have got that, and Coldplay, and that. They're great bands. Sort of have that, and Madonna does it absolutely fantastic. Some of her music, and I remember the Drop the Debt concert about 2006, 7 or something like that, and watching the performances, and it was incredible when you watched that, how it was the anthems that you could just see the audience elevating and coming up and just going and singing along with it. So it's that quality that I think they have.
And music does have this social dimension to it, doesn't it? It sort of brings people together. I mean, that is the heart of what music is, and probably where it came from is this sort of social dimension.
Well, that's really an interesting point. I know, John, you've made this point as well. I would at the time I would never think to go to an Oasis concert. So I'm not necessarily a fan. I'd know all the songs, I'll sing along, but I'm not necessarily a fan. I'm actually considering going, even though it's 15 years since they were together. But just the fact everyone's talking about it, it's a social event. I feel like I'm missing out. There's something about the fame, isn't there, that they've created that makes you want to. And I know, John, this is a point you make about it's not just what you think. Actually, it's about how others around you think about
It's
about
like
a brand that is as important.
As we say about a brand, it's not made just by the people who buy it, but by the people who know about it. But it's like any brand, any kind of advertising campaign, any communication campaign, let's call it that, should be about how do I make this culturally important? That's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to elevate it and put it into culture. So therefore it becomes something that everybody has to kind of have an opinion on. And the problem that we have today is too many brands are living in silos and nobody ever gets to experience them. So I don't really talk about them. Don't really care. It's not part of my life anymore. And I think the Oasis example is just a genius example of how, you come back and you become important to people again. Now, obviously, there's a backstory about the brothers split up and, hated each other, but they did write great music, and you forget it was great music.
And projected a personality too, didn't they? And that's so important in advertising as well, that you've got to have character, you've got to project something, you've got to be likable.
Yeah. Well, they didn't actually fly. I'm not sure I don't think they didn't worry about pissing people off.
No, that's true.
No,
that's
not
true.
at all.
They didn't. They just went, fuck it. If you don't like it, your problem.
Almost. I wonder if they hadn't had a feud, would we be talking about it in the way that we are? I think there's a story. It's a bit like Harry and William kind of falling out as brothers, and if they get together, that'll become a big story, won't it?
Phenomenal.
It's a bit like that, isn't it? It's like they're famously sort of separated as brothers, and the fact they get a bit like the Spice Girls getting back or whatever, isn't it?
You've got to have a great falling out.
You need
I think we should suggest that to a brand, shouldn't we? What you've got to do
you need a big disaster.
is have a massive falling out within the brand. Kellogg's and Frosties have a massive falling out. The Tiger no longer wants to be part of it and says, I've been used and you've abused me, and rushes off. And then we'll create a campaign around the Tiger comes back to Frosties.
There we go.
I know what it is. No, it's kind of an interesting strategy. I don't think you can do it on purpose. I think it just happens, doesn't it?
The
Beatles, after all, but sadly
it's true.
Never got back together again, which is one of the great tragedies. Of course, we all know why.
Another element I think that's impressive about Oasis is probably not appreciated enough. And I know, Orlando, you talk often about fluent devices, but like they wear like raincoats on stage.
Very distinctive,
They've kept their hair pretty consistent over sort of 30 years. The Mancunian accent is obviously one of the most distinctive accents in the country. But those things add up, don't they, to make them uniquely Oasis, and you just couldn't replicate that. So I think uniqueness is something else about them as well.
I think authentic as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other great thing. They are what they are, and they are not owned by the man. You can imagine the manager coming to them or something saying, "Look, fine guys, I think the hair's got to change. We've got to put you into some, different clothing." I mean, they'd be told in no uncertain terms where to get off. Yeah. And I think that authenticity is something that people respond to as well. They are themselves. Now, we all know I'm saying this, almost certainly doing it because they need the money. Why not? What's wrong with that? But that authenticity really comes through.
It does. And the other thing that might be surprising, I think, with this is that you might have assumed in 15 years, so much has changed. They can't be relevant now, surely. But actually, if anything, it's the evidence the contrary, that there are some unchanging things. It's like the fact my daughter's favourite programme is Friends, which is incredible. So I was, I think, 18 when Friends came out or whatever. Yeah. And now my oldest daughter's almost 18. And, my youngest is 16 and they love Friends. Yeah. And it's this thing that unites cross generations as well, which is really quite powerful in the age of fragmentation and that we have today.
It is. The unchanging man, as Bill Bernbach put it, you talk about the changing man, I talk to you about the unchanging man. And that's true, isn't it? Yeah. The human principle, human condition, the human, I suppose, motivations, they don't change very much.
They don't. And the trouble is that marketing forces you to look at the changing man. The new. And actually, it then creates a disservice to the communication program because you kind of go, you're constantly changing rather than developing a relationship with your potential audience. It's what we were talking about. Maybe marketing directors, they should no longer be called marketing directors. I think because they are genuinely creating a disservice to brands, and what they should be called is entertainment directors. Because that's what people want, isn't it? Yeah. Entertainment.
I love that idea.
Why don't we create something that people want? It's just like making a product, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't go out and go, I'll make a fruit drink that's so disgusting, people pour it down. No, you try and make the greatest fruit drink you can possibly make. Well, why not think about your brand in the same way? Why didn't you make something that people go, you must go and watch this. Yeah. This is really great. This is really good. We don't. And we focus on all this marketing stuff. And I'm increasingly getting to the view that it just gets in the way. Get rid of it. I'd fire all the marketing directors, get rid of the lot, and go, you're now, you've got to reapply, you're now the entertainment director. How are you engaging the audience? How are you entertaining me? And it isn't about budget. It's about ideas. It's about an attitude, a point of view. So fire all the marketing directors, re-engage them as entertainment directors, and they can't do that. The door's over there. It operates both ways. Out you go.
I love that.
It does change the way language, does change the way you look at things, doesn't it? So it's very important to put on a show, I think, in advertising. Showmanship, as we've often talked about, is what you have to do. You've got this space. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? Are we going to use an actor? Are we going to use some music? Are we going to use dialogue? What is this thing? Yeah. With space we're going to do with it?
I remember interviewing the founder of Liquid Death, and again, he doesn't have anything to do with marketing.
No,
he doesn't talk about marketing. He talks about, well, what do we love first of all? What we think that's a great idea. And as you were saying, John, they go and deliver their drink in a hearse.
Yeah.
And you go, well, what? Sorry? Well, we're called Liquid Death. Why not? And, they have a point of view that says, we think this is fun. We want to project it as fun. And it's water. And the company's worth over $1 billion.
Yeah.
It's water, called Liquid Death. And that shows you what you can actually do.
Trevor Robinson says, he was talking to me recently, and he said, when we have an idea, and I say to my creative team, is this something that you would like to see happen? Would you like to see this come to life? Because that's often a good marker of whether it's going to be entertaining or not. if you actually want to see this happen, I think it's a nice indication.
We do forget this. So we get so wrapped up in our own kind of industry bubble. We just forget. Well, would we actually?
Would we like it?
Would we find it funny? Yeah, we forget, don't we?
Yeah.
We do the logic and the strategy and forget. Well, actually, would I actually?
Would I care to see it at the end of it?
Well, I think it's very important if you're working in advertising. I always used to say, I work in advertising, I don't live in advertising. And I actually don't like advertising. I mean, I generally really don't like, and although I spent, a fantastic career in it, but I never wanted to create advertising. I wanted to create work that people looked up to in some way or another. Whether I succeeded or not is another point of view. But that was my motivation. I mean, and the whole generation when I came into advertising were of a similar view. We were kind of, motivated by Bernbach and what was going on in New York and the great work coming out of there about, let's create work that's intelligent, smart, witty, but inclusive. It didn't exclude, it included. And we all went, that's what we want to do. Just like, a band would write music. It doesn't want to exclude people. Yeah. It writes what it loves and writes what it does, writes what it thinks about, and creates music that people want to be a part of.
Hey, you mentioned Bernbach then. I know, Orlando, you've been doing some research for your course and you've gone back and looked at a lot of the archives from that time.
I have, yeah.
Which is quite fascinating. What struck you as you did that maybe we could learn from today, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, big thanks to DDB as well and Tom Ash, the strategy director, for opening up the archives to me. Some fantastic handwritten notes, the book he never wrote, that, we've used in the course. And footage, of course, of him talking. And I think when you go back to it, and I draw out the 7 principles that we can use for standing out from Bill Bernbach. And I think, first of all, it's understand the human condition, because great showmanship advertising has to understand human motivation. And that is really very fundamental. But respect the audience. And also have an idea, that you find the magic in the idea. And often you find it's in juxtaposition of two things that you get, that you dramatize an idea. And I think we've when you look at a lot of advertising today, it doesn't really seem to have an idea in it. It seems a bit confused.
It's a remarkable point to make, isn't it?
A bit garbled and a bit confusing, really. And also quite short. So it's got all of those things, but it's in 15 or 20 seconds. And you think, well, what? I don't feel any the wiser after that. And it's not really brought out the magic in the product. And I think that's what he talked about. And seeing the ad as a whole as well, the gestalt. I mean, he obviously brought art directors and copywriters together. And I think that shows. And before they'd they'd be the copywriter, and then send it by pneumatic tube down to the art director on the
visualizers. I think they were called. Exactly. They were called visualizers. They weren't called art directors.
No, they didn't. They weren't elevated to that status, were they? They were the floor below. When you get that, it feels bitty. The ad looks like it's sort of in parts, and it's very much product focus. It's the company, it's the advertiser trying to push what they think on people. Whereas the creative revolution was not like that. It was Bill Bernbach looked at the product through the audience's eyes, and that turning it the other way round, sort of the other way of the telescope, is really what made it work, I think, with freshness and imagination. And treating the audience with respect, and that was what was fresh and new about it. And it was part of a wider cultural change that bubbled up from a very conservative and hierarchical 1950s, with its focus on efficiency and scale and bigness, and the science, actually. And it was the science, Rossa Reeves, the USP, so unique selling proposition, which he developed based on much earlier theories from advertising. And science, if science is great for understanding what we know now, but you need imagination for a creative leap. And the science led him to fix the USP for many years, made it very repetitive, the sort of advertising you got, made it very monotonous. And the reputation of advertising had hit rock bottom, really, in the 1950s, much like today, by the way, with our rather monotonous and repetitive.
Haven't we gone back to that today? The sort of, the obsession with data.
we have data and the science that fixes things, and it makes advertising static and not very. There's no movement. There's no life. There's no imagination to it,
or empathy,
of course. And we think that there is the one answer, and it's got to be that. But it's Bernbach talked about artistry. He didn't really use the word creativity or creative. It was artistry that he used, and he said, if only art can make you feel, and only feeling can make you act, and that was, and he's absolutely right.
Well, he said salesmanship is an art, not a science, didn't he? That was his great line.
He did.
But we're in that. It's interesting actually. We haven't used the word consumer, and it's a word I dislike intensely. We've used the word audience, which implies a respect for the people you're talking to and a way you approach it. We don't ever hear Taylor Swift refer to her followers as my consumers. They might be called Swifties, but they're an audience. And I think, again, those words change. I sort of always shiver when I'm in a meeting and they talk about consumers, and it's a horrible word. It's just I'm forcing you to consume rather than I'm trying to get you to engage. And it's just, again, a difference. And we've gone, we're in this world today, we're in the left brain world, aren't we, rather than the right brain.
That's right. And it's down to the way we dispose our attention. So, if we're thinking about, the left brain likes to think of things in linear sequences, this, that. And it's one of those, it likes to categorize as well. And so you're right, it focus and this left hemisphere way of thinking, which is about grasping, the left hemisphere grasps with the right hand. That is really what salesmanship advertising is about. It's focused on the sale, on getting the sale, on nudging the already half interested towards a purchase. Showmanship does a totally different job in that it has to capture attention in the first place, get you noticed. It has to charm you through an emotional appeal. It creates preference. Salesmanship tends to try to demonstrate superiority, but in creating preference, you also create a sense of superiority at the same time. You kind of do both jobs.
You need to do both, don't you?
Both,
yeah.
And
persuasion and promotion.
Both of these schools are important, but each supports the other. But really, of the two, it's showmanship that we need to focus our time, energy, effort, and budgets on, because that's what drives the profit and the growth. And that's what we've forgotten how to do, I think, in the last 20 years or so.
So, John, how similar was it when you founded BBH? I mean, because obviously you decided to set up an agency, presumably for a reason to make a change. What was happening at the time? Is it similar to today, or was it different?
I mean, I think we set BBH up in 1982, having been at TBWA, which was very, it was, we helped grow the London office of TBWA. And then we felt we could actually do it better. And that what we perceived was that what we needed was a greater connection between strategy and creativity. And that, most brands were kind of going wrong, not because there wasn't some good creative work, but strategically they were facing in the wrong direction. And so what we had was a great belief in develop an interesting strategy and then create some advertising, some creativity around that, which is why when I wrote my book on advertising on BBH and everything else, I called it Turning Intelligence into Magic. And that was the big change that we felt had to be made. And that's why when we set it up, we said we weren't going to do speculative creative work when we pitched. And what we were going to do is talk about the strategy and how your strategy needed to be honed, needed to be perfected, needed to be redirected even. And out of that will then come the kind of work that creates the effectiveness that you want. So that was our desire to do that. And, we were a development in a creative revolution that was going on by absolutely linking the strategic thinking with the creative execution.
Greg Hahn, who's the founder of Mischief, the most awarded agency in America at the moment, doing incredible work. But it's very interesting. When I asked him about the creative work, time and time again, he came back to it starts at a brilliant insight and really, really sharp strategy. And then the creative job is so much easier.
Yeah.
He really emphasized that point again and again, because you expect the creative to be like, oh, I'm just in the ideas and the whatever. But he's no. It got to start with great insight and great strategy.
And great artists are like that. You know, they have they have a point of view about this is what I am trying to say. And obviously the successful ones are saying things that people find interesting and stimulating. You know, I mean, it was like, you know, David Hockney goes to California, good Yorkshire boy, and he suddenly sees swimming pools. And he goes, there's magic in swimming pools. But that insight into kind of how we observed the world, Californians thought, well, swimming pools everywhere. You know, he became successful because the world outside of California suddenly looked, wow, this place is amazing. And he observed this and said, that's what I'm going to demonstrate. He just didn't, I'll do some swimming pools. He actually had a point of view about it. If you come from a grey, drab, European, Northern European world, it looks fantastic. Yeah. And so, you know, we have bigger splash.
You've said the same about agencies before, John, as well, haven't you? That it's important to have a point of view, a perspective, you know, and that you develop yours, and it was irreverence.
Said,
and that was your.
You have to have a guiding principle in what you're doing, and it was Nigel Bogan, my partner, wonderful partner, who said the problem with advertising agencies, they all think they're on Tottenham Court Road. You know, nobody's in Oxford Street, or nobody's in Bond Street, or nobody's, you know what I mean? We're all things to all people. Instead of actually going, no, we have a point of view. It's not going to be right for everybody.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is, I think most advertising agencies are really bad, and I'm going to use that word, marketing, because they don't have a point of view. And it is the old classic, you know, what time is it? What time would you like it to be? And therefore we suffer because we don't pursue things. And if you look at the great agencies, you look at, you know, obviously Dordan Bernbeck in New York, you look at Abbott Mead here, they had a point of view. It was Sainsbury's, it was Volvo, it was kind of, you could see that tone of voice coming through. CDP. You look at that sort of entertainment, then you look at Gold Greenleaf Trot, you look at their kind of, you know, Hello Tosh got a new Toshiba, and it was Dave Trott, you know, and you could see it coming through and
projects personality again.
And you know, John Webster and Furry Creatures.
Yes.
You know, and we had very much, I think, that sense of irreverence tied to style, because we like style and we liked humor. And that drove us, you know, that's why in the world, when the world zigs, you zag.
Yeah.
And I think you need that. And like any great brand needs a point of view, because actually what you're doing is, you're not just advertising, you're trying to create a movement. You know, a brand is trying to create a movement. Follow this. Come here. We're changing the way the world feels or thinks. And you know, the great companies do that. Apple, you know, when they were at their, you know, when they were forming, or Nike, or whoever you want to look at, had that sense of this is a movement. You know, Volkswagen back in the 60s, it was think small. It was a movement, you know. Everything doesn't have to be big; it can be small, and that. So you're doing that, and you have to have a point of view to create that.
Now, talking about a movement, we were in Cannes together, weren't we, earlier in the summer? And you packed out a rather large auditorium, and to talk about the next creative revolution. What is it that you want to do together? Because you've collaborated together to bring a new course to the world. So congratulations on that. Yeah. What are you trying to achieve, and why now? What is it about today that needs to see a new movement occur?
Well, first of all, I think this is something that Orlando's been working on for, one could argue, 20 years.
Well, you could
argue, couldn't you?
Yeah.
But it's called Advertising Principles Explained. And I think we're an industry that is not moving forward because it has misunderstood some basic principles, and it doesn't realize there are things that you can learn from history. I always quote my history master who said, you came into us at the age of 11, he came in and said, I'm here to teach you history. History isn't about the past, it's about the future. And I think what Orlando's done is he's written and created a whole series of talks on how advertising got to where it was and is, and how it can move forward. And when you're armed with that, you actually understand how I can make my advertising better. So it's called Advertising Principles Explained, APE. which is why we had a gorilla on
I was going to
stage.
say, that does explain the surprise guests on stage.
Good branding, I think.
Yep.
But I think, it is, I think, our industry is, I think, in crisis. I really do genuinely believe that. I think we've got something like now 1 billion people paying online not to receive advertising.
Wow.
Blocking.
Blocking.
A third, isn't it? A third of all internet users.
A third of all internet users.
I had no idea of that. I'd never heard that before. That's the thing we do and spend money on, and a lot of money. Well, in fact, talking of money, the global advertising industry is just, I think it excludes China, has just tipped over $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Which is up, I think, 10%. So we're building a wall to stop advertising, and we're building an even bigger, like, cannonball. Or what's the old-fashioned thing where they trebuchet, where they throw the fiery ball.
But it's
over
like
the
an
wall.
arms race, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll get more nuclear weapons, so to stop you doing. So I'll get more. And what we're doing is instead of actually lowering the wall by saying, why don't we create something that people actually enjoy? Going back to entertainment, and I think our industry has forgotten that the first thing you've got to do is engage me, and say something that that's interesting. I like that. I want to share that, which after all, the greatest form of advertising is word of mouth. All advertising campaigns should be, where is word of mouth going to come out of this? It should be on the brief. How is word of mouth going to come out of this? And then creating work that actually people applaud. Wouldn't that be good? Yeah. Well, I always say, you ever read a business book where somebody said, now, for your next product, why don't you make something people don't like? There's no future in that, is there? And that's what we're doing. We're making a product that people don't like. Now, how is that going to be effective? And I think there is another aspect to that. It's like fast fashion. So we're churning out more stuff. You're told more stuff. The planet can't survive with this. If you care about your carbon footprint, which all brands should, you care about the packaging, you care about transport, but what about your communication? You're spending more and more on average stuff that's being rejected, and that's costing the planet. So if you care about your carbon footprint, then you should start thinking about, how can I create work that generates word of mouth, because that's the most efficient.
Yeah.
So we've got to think about creativity. My belief is, think about creativity as a green industry. That's what it is.
That's a great perspective, actually. And back to our friends at Oasis, one post. did everything.
Didn't need any more than that.
Yeah.
And that's why I think what Orlando has written in this Advertising Principles Explained, which is absolutely brilliant. How do we get back to creating work that people want?
Yeah. Now, some might say that, we're just all harking back to a golden time where everyone sat around the telly together watching the Levi's commercial and listening and buying the track, as I did at the age 15. But Orlando, what I think, to your credit, you've done is you've brought the science and the evidence to the conversation as well. And I think the importance of that is, when you're in business, and you're a CMO like I used to be, I'd have to go in and justify kind of why we should be, investing often a lot of money. It's often sometimes it's the biggest investment a brand or a company will make in a year. But there is some good evidence, isn't there? And I know you've published a lot on this, but describe some of the evidence that backs up what you're saying about salesmanship.
Quite strong evidence, and not just from me either, but, evidence that the sort of advertising that captures attention, that moves people, tends to involve the living, something unexpected happening, people, animals, facial expressions, all of these things that you can see. I mean, look at laundress ad, it's still brilliant. And it's got all of those things in it, scene unfolding. So all of those things that capture attention, generate an emotional response. And then when you look at the kind of advertising that looks like that has that kind of look and feel, you find that it's that kind of advertising that drives awareness, salience, growth, sales gain, profit share gain.
Yeah.
And that kind of advertising, emotional advertising, otherwise, you might describe it as, is the sort of advertising that drives not just volume sales over time and lasting effects, but also reduces your price sensitivity. So it pushes your pricing power, which of course comes down to profit, profit margins, what you can charge. as well as a whole host of other business effects that go with it. You know, recruitment, it becomes easier. People stay with you for longer. You can get, you know, cheaper loans. You know, the credit terms are better if you're a big brand. Helps you with all kinds of other stakeholders. It lubricates the whole business in a way that salesmanship doesn't. You know, salesmanship is focused on the sale, on the quick sale amongst the half interested here and now. So showmanship drives these broader, longer lasting effects. And so in the course, we provide the evidence, you know, to help you make your case, but also frameworks for thinking about the creative itself, you know, and to help judgment, really, to help to judge whether you've got a good idea or not.
I think actually most brands would be better off if they cut their budget. They just said, right, we're going to spend 25% less. And what we want is we want 75% better creative work, because that way we'll compensate for the cut in budget and that will create work. So I think one of the great advantages today, which was harder, you know, in our era, when you talk about the golden era, yeah, it was, but, you know, it worked in a different way. I think today you've got the brilliance of being able to talk to an audience. You have to sort of identify who you're going to talk to in a way which is engaging, involving, committed, and all the things that we want to do that doesn't require huge amounts of money. It doesn't. I mean, I think that's the wonderful thing. You know, I came from an era when, oh my God, how much did a television commercial cost? How much did it cost to go on time? Well, you can get round all of that now. But if you've got a brilliant idea and a brilliant attitude, you can do. And you know, if we talk about, you know, a cereal brand called Surreal, who've made LinkedIn their kind of their media, and they're creating great ads, and they're obviously having fun. They're obviously enjoying themselves, creating work, and it's the fastest growing cereal in the UK today. And I think it shows that, you know, but a lot of people say, oh yeah, but UK, it was big budgets. No. Don't think like that. Think about better creativity. Yeah. Think about engaging and entertaining.
I think the essence of that question though is because what you're suggesting there is absolutely right, that with constraint you have to be more creative, right? But unfortunately, most CMOs are going, my budget's being cut and I'm being asked to deliver results quicker, therefore I'll shift my budget into performance. And that's the mistake, isn't it? Right? Because taking the creative channel is absolutely the right response to that. But instead, I think the problem is that I'll spend more money on Meta because I've got a fancy dashboard. It tells me I'm getting good results. I'm not seeing it in real life, but, you know, I've got a chart. I can go back to the boss and say, oh, look, you know, look how many people clicked on this.
But aren't those brands just in decline?
Yeah, exactly.
They're just the brands in decline. So you have to go, I go to Surreal, I go, here's a brand growing. Where do I want to go? Yeah. Who do I want to be a part of? Liquid Death?
Well, that's Liquid Death, perfect example.
You know, why do I want to be? Surely that's where you've got you. If you are about tomorrow, the future, why do you want to be with a brand that's in slow decline as opposed to a brand that's growing? That's where I'd want to go.
Yeah,
there was a campaign. The campaign that got DDB noticed, I think, but by VW was the Orbach's campaign for the, you know, retailer and smallish retailer in New York. And they spent about a 40th of the budget of Macy's. And yet when you ask New Yorkers, you know, who's spending, who do you see more of, you know, which retailer comes to mind? It was Orbach's that was winning. And that, I think, just shows, you know, how creative work, really creative work, has that ability to cut through.
Now Oasis. One ad.
Back to Oasis.
Back to Oasis.
We'd have to call this episode, you know, why Oasis won. Anyway, but
cool.
Orlando, you've spent more time than anyone else I know looking at advertising, studying its effects, writing up the principles, and you now put it into course, which is wonderful. So, and everyone should sign up. Who would you say today? Because it's easy to go back, and I've heard you a lot, you know, as we know each other very well, talking about inspiration from the past. But today, who do you think is doing the kind of work that would meet your bar?
We talked to a lot of people on the course, you know, CMOs, and one of the brands that we feature is Cadbury's. So I think Cadbury's is doing some work that is showing us how to stand out in a noisy category, in a noisy world. They have gone back to, I suppose, the founding philanthropists' Cadbury, who were all about generosity, and generosity is quiet, and so they've created this wonderful campaign, which is very quiet in the way that it works. It doesn't really need many words either, but it's all done through facial expression, through gestures, through interactions between people. It looks very much like a Vermeer painting. If ever you've looked at Vermeer paintings, they're quiet, but there's something going on between these two people. Often.
But they're powerful, though, aren't they?
Very powerful.
They're not recessive.
No, it pushes it.
Actually,
it's because
you take more, you lean in
because
of the way they're talking to you.
Information is withheld in a way, isn't it? And that's how you capture attention. It's like not giving people everything they need to know right now, and you sort of lean in. Well, what's going on here between this interaction? And you only know often by the end of the ad, what the relationship is. The garage ad, for instance, great example of that. What's the relationship between this woman and this man? Are they romantically involved? What's the age difference? I'm not quite sure. And it's only at the end that you realize when she shouts out, "I love you, Dad," that is, they've obviously had a falling out.
But I mean, we've done the face trace on that, haven't we? In terms of system, one thing, and the uplift at that moment where she says "Love you, Dad" is one of the biggest uplifts, emotional transformations I've ever seen in an ad before. Yeah. It's 5.9 on our scale. I mean, it literally tops out the scale,
and that is right. Psychological transformation is what one of my classes episodes is about. How do you create that in the viewer? And it's often by showing it on the screen, and that is a wonderful.
It's interesting you pick that example. It's another one of your history teacher would approve of is looking back in the brand's past actually to find the secrets of the future, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And that quiet consistency.
Brand archaeology.
It's not
what made us famous in the first place.
And it's quite nice to have Liquid Death as the upstart, but Cadbury's been around 200 years, 150 years,
something like that.
200.
So it shows you don't have to be the new kid on the block to do things that are effective.
And just looking at the Lynx advertising, they've gone back to the Lynx effect, and are creating very, very interesting work now. And again, going back to kind of that core thing of what are we about? We're about giving you confidence. It's not really a fragrance; it's giving you confidence. And they've gone back to kind of articulating the campaign as it was when we first launched it back in 1990.
Now, I love that. I mean, that's one of the most, if I were to pick, some of the most iconic and clever campaigns, that'd be one. But yeah, tell us about the original brief you worked on and where that all came from.
The original brief on Lynx was, obviously, it's for 15-year-olds, a fragrance. It's not a deodorant, it's a fragrance, and it's basically for kids at a time when confidence, they're emerging as adults, they're unsure. So it's a very pertinent product for them. But what we did is they'd been running advertising saying, bloke sprays it on and all of a sudden women are falling at his feet. And it was all kind of cliched nonsense. And they came to us, Simon Clift, who was the marketing director, brilliant marketing director, said, look, this is just not cutting through. It's just not talking to our audience. We're not growing the brand. And we said to him, so what you've got to do is you're talking to a 15-year-old. You've got to talk to the opinion leader in there because they're all at school. So if you talk to the opinion leader, everybody follows them. So that makes your advertising more effective. But you've got to understand they know advertising. They understand it. They're very, very knowledgeable about it. And going to them saying, you spray this on and you'll get the girl, they just laugh at you. It's just nonsense. So we said, play a game with them to say, I know that this is nonsense, that if I spray this on. So what we'll do is we'll take a geek and how a geek gets the girl. But remember, it does wear off. And the first ad we did was a guy goes to a party and he's very unsure. It's, I'm feeling ill. He goes into the bathroom, sees some Lynx, sprays it on, comes out and he's Mr. Cool. And all of a sudden, all the girls want to look at him. And he goes out and he dances with her and he takes her out on the balcony and he says, but just remember, it does wear off when he opens his arms and smacks her in the face and she falls over. So that whole sense of playing with the genre grew the brand. And that's what drove it. And the next one we did was a geeky guy who gets Jennifer Aniston doing his laundry, doing his ironing. And it really, really grew the brand. The problem came is that then began to listen to too much research. And the research would come back about the ads with every, like it. And of course, what also came back is young boys like girls with big breasts. Yeah, I could have kind of told you that. So increasingly, the ads featured girls with bigger breasts, and it became vulgar. And it lost that lovely quality of, this is a joke, guys. You know it, I know it, we all know it.
Yeah.
And was building an interesting brand. And they moved away from that. Sales decline. And now they've gone back to it.
But you make a really good point there about like what we have lost a lot today is just the sense of humor, because
Humor.
I found that very funny just listening to you talk about that. And I get the joke, and I, as a 15-year-old boy, I'd have loved to have sent that to my friends as a bit of a laugh. Oh, can you imagine like Billy down there that you will take Mickey out of, give him some links or whatever. It's funny. It's what creates the word of mouth that you talked about.
Exactly.
It feels like we've become too serious today.
But again, it's that left brain. Oh, I don't like, why are you joking? Well, because that's how people like to engage with people. That's how they remember things. That's how they and it overcomes all kinds of problems. Humor overcomes all sorts of problems.
It does.
And you're absolutely right. We've forgotten it. And advertising was great. And, we're not saving the world. It's advertising. We're selling deodorant. We're selling a breakfast cereal with a yogurt, a car, or whatever, Can we not just lighten things up a bit and make people engage?
There's a whole class on this in the course on humour, and it's really important because it broadens our attention. Actually, humour, anxiety, and hunger narrow it, but humour broadens our attention. So we're interested in it, and we're interested because there's often an incongruence. Come back to juxtaposition, putting two things together. I think the Lynx effect's a great example. And we thought, what's going on here exactly? And so it holds your attention is the first thing it does. Second thing it does, once we've worked it out, we're more likely to put the thing in memory. And thirdly, we feel pretty clever and funny, good about ourselves at the end of it. So it leaves a positive impression on the viewer, So actually, there are really good reasons why we should use humour. And of course, it's much more effective campaigns.
Have you ever done a bit of research? Because if I were to think about, I don't know, let's say ads I remember from the 80s, I'm pretty sure at least half, maybe more, were funny.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm sure 50% of ads in the 80s weren't funny, but I remember the funny ones. So that funny creates much bigger share of my mind than unfunny.
Yes.
I mean, that's a bit of a plonky way of saying it.
Yeah.
But is there some logic around what makes us laugh gets remembered?
There is. It's the generation effect, so it's called. And, so you laugh at something and you're more likely to put it in memory, and you're more likely to remember the gist. I talk in the course about, there was an experiment where people were shown some bizarre cartoons and some funny cartoons. And they showed that the bizarre cartoons, people didn't really remember, but it was the funny ones that people remembered the gist of. And much, much better. So it's not the sort of puzzling at what's going on. It's not the unusualness of a thing so much that drives the effectiveness of humour. It's the resolution and the working it out and putting it into memory. And that's very important. And so the gap can't be too big, but it can't be too that the audience has to fill in. It can't be too big, but it can't be too small either. It's got to be, you give people enough to get it, but not too much that it's not funny.
I think one of my proudest moments as a kid was there was a comic called Whizzer and Chips, which I used to get every week, and you used to have to write, you have to make up a joke and send it in, and I think I sort of sent in sort of 8 or 10 or whatever. Eventually got it published.
Well done.
I got a Whizzer and Chips wallet sent to me that I had as kind of growing up as a kid. It was my proudest moments kind of thing, But it's amazing, that humour does create memory, doesn't it? In a very
I can remember
way.
the very, very first advertisement I ever remember. I was about 8 years old, and it was a Guinness poster, and it just had "Down with Guinness." And I went back to my father and I said, I don't understand it. I've just seen this poster, and it had a toucan in it, and I'm "Down with Guinness." And I said, "Why are they telling you not to drink Guinness?" He said, "Oh, no." He said, "That's a little joke. You see, get it? Down with Guinness." And all of a sudden, I remember that.
Yeah, there you go.
I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And we're hardwired to want to laugh. We're hardwired towards humor because I think it opens people up and it creates community. That's the thing and that's what we
It's very
seek and
social.
desire. And because we're social beings, and humour is a great way of developing sociability.
Yeah.
And brands are a fundamental part of
They
that.
are.
So we're back to entertainment again, aren't
Yeah,
we?
we are.
Now, obviously, you're putting on this course to help. What would your advice be to senior marketers, CMOs listening in terms of getting businesses behind this kind of thing? I mean, John, you must have worked with a lot of, kind of high-powered CMOs in your time. I suppose what makes a great CMO when it comes to being able to sell this kind of approach into their organizations?
Well, I think what we're driven by is effectiveness. We always said, at BBH, we were always driven by effectiveness because we understood that what we were creating produced effectiveness. And I think when you go through this course, you look at how much advertising is actually working. I think there's some fact about, 90% of it isn't working. So that's only 10% is working, might even be less. I don't know. But if I could move that to 15%, wouldn't that be great? So I think what this course does for you is it helps you understand all the differences, and it helps you understand how can I move that 10% to 15%. So it's about how can I be more effective, and actually then begin to be able to dissect all the differences that are going on and be the smartest guy in the room or woman, whatever it might be.
It did make me smile. You did a brilliant presentation, and having the ape on at the end was a master stroke in capturing people's attention. But over on LinkedIn, the big debate that ensued was, I think you used the phrase, only 6% of advertising is truly effective.
Yeah.
And then a massive debate rage. Oh, according to this source, it's 4%, and then this source, it's 10.
Yeah.
Marketing LinkedIn just went into meltdown over whether it's 6, 4, 8, 10. It doesn't matter.
Sort of, as you said, John, it's like arguing about how quickly the Titanic is sinking. Is he drowning? Should we throw him up? No, he'll be all right.
I know we do get people do.
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
Get sort of obsessed about the bigger picture here, guys. Is it's not working.
Most of it doesn't work.
Yeah, most of it doesn't work.
Let's improve it. I agree.
Yeah.
So
that's
when's the course launching?
The first cohort's on the 23rd of September, so taking bookings now. advertisingprinciplesexplained.com. And it's the questions I ask really are: can you and your board, importantly, and I think probably your agency too, articulate the difference between salesmanship and showmanship advertising? Can you describe the scale and type of business effect associated with each? And can you and your board and your agency, recognize these two schools of advertising when they see it and know how to develop, in particular, showmanship advertising? Because if the answer to those is no, I'm not sure they can, then how can you brief it, judge it, develop it, sell it in? And that's what the course really, I think, is helping people to do.
And
it's supporting marketers.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to do is it does give you context. I think it's terrifying we're an industry that doesn't understand its history. And we're not asking people to go back, but if you studied architecture, you would know who Mies van der Rohe is. You would know who Frank Lloyd Wright is. You'd know why they did what they did and how you've moved it forward. Fashion, you're studying fashion, you'd know who Coco Chanel is. You'd know who, all the other greats. In our industry, people don't, you've mentioned names here. People are going to go, who?
Yeah.
And you can't move forward unless you understand the context of how you've got to where you've got to, and then how I can push it forward.
Often gives you the energy to move forward.
Principles remain, but practices change. Understanding those, and it's terrifying that we don't have that, and that's partly what I think APE explains and gets you up to a point, but you have the confidence then to know how to move forward.
Yeah,
I think confidence is key, actually, because that's what this course gives you is that's what I've enjoyed by working with you and getting a glimpse into the course as well. It's just, it gives you the evidence to win the argument, and it also gives you inspiration because you see how it could be done.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly motivating. So, it's well done.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, John. I mean, it's very interesting. The long and short of it, essentially, Les and Peter of, very famous publication, those arguments were being had in 1915 You know, the long and short of it existed then, really, between these two schools, salesmanship and showmanship. You can see the same thing back then. And although they didn't have all the evidence to support it back then, there was enough for people to know that these two schools exist.
Well, I think that's the difference now is we've got overwhelming evidence of why it works and how it works. And so there's no excuses not to be able to go and, work with your creative partners and sell it into the board, which is brilliant. I thought we'd just round up. I put a post out on LinkedIn this morning, knowing we're going to have this chat. Any questions for John as he's going to be here? So got a good response, actually. So I thought, if you don't mind, we'll round up with a few quick ones. We may have touched on some of these already, but let's see how we get on. So Fiona was asking you, is there a campaign that didn't do as well as you expected, or vice versa? Is there one that has done better than you expected? So going back to your BBH days.
I think I've always focused on the positive. I've always not because I don't want, but I mean, there's so much rubbish about. You in a way, I've always said you learn from great things. Mistakes will happen. But the one I would say that worked it much, much better than I ever anticipated was Vorsprung durch Technik for Audi. And it did literally become a catchphrase to the point where, when Boris Becker was playing, and he wasn't doing very well, they'd say, Boris has lost his Vorsprung. And it was a line that we had to really argue within the agency to kind of, should we go with it, should we not? And research said no. But we had two brilliant clients at Audi who said, well, we are a German brand, let's be honest about it. And so they went with it, and the rest is history. So, and it became actually the most famous, almost car brand advertising at that time, and still exists today. They still run it today. So that is one I would say.
Yeah. I love that example because I remember it as an audience going, hang on a minute, have they played the German version on? Yeah, I really was confused. But it's one of those things, the more I saw it, the more I got it.
And Jeffrey Palmer, who delivered it, wonderful act, in that wonderful deadpan, slightly sardonic way. Vorsprung durch Technik, as they say in Germany. and it was, we used to get complaints from German teachers here saying, you're pronouncing it incorrect. Yes, that's part of the point.
Yes. Well, we'll have this with you, don't I? I lovingly refer to Orlando as the Grand Fromage. And then one of our French listeners corrected me on my pronunciation. So Les Petits Légumes, I think you then decided was a more accurate way.
Gros bonnet.
Oh, Gros bonnet. There you go.
Gros légumes.
They don't understand Gros Fromage.
We had to translate it.
It's way funnier in English anyway. But we'll stick with that. Next question from a former BBH employee, no less, actually, Tom Roach.
Oh, Tom.
Lovely Tom.
Love Tom, big fan of his. I think he's asking for a friend, quote unquote. What role do planners have in the success of the creative?
Well, I said already, I called my book Hegarty on Advertising, Turning Intelligence into Magic. And I think planners are the intelligence and I'm there to provide the magic. So that's the role they play. And I've always said that.
Diego here has asked, how did you sell Flat Eric into a skeptical Levi's team?
Persistence. And I kept
he won't go away.
I kept coming back with it. And a wonderful guy there who was in charge of it said, oh God, no, he's going to get that Flat Eric out again. Oh, God, Jesus. And we were getting closer and closer to the air date. And we did have a lot of trust with each other. And the third time I went back with it, he looked at me and he said, John, you really, really think this is going to work? And I said, it's going to be fantastic. Really promise you. I didn't know that, of course, but you have to have confidence to say that. And he said, okay, we'll go with it. And so it's persistence and being committed. But that comes out of a relationship you've built over time. You don't suddenly get that. And being absolutely honest and truthful with your clients about what you're doing builds that trust. And when you've done that, then you can sell them great work.
Paul here asks, many clients tend towards conformity. How do you challenge them to think differently?
Well, I always should say to clients, surely the point of a brand is to be different. Shall I advertise this as the same? Is that your brief to me? Because if so, I can do that. I can go away. I actually come back in about 5 minutes with an ad that's just like the one you've done. So the point of it is to be different, because if you're not different, well, why be in existence? Yeah. Audi is different from BMW. Your job is to dramatize the difference. And if your advertising isn't doing that, then give up, sell the brand and go and do something else.
Yeah, exactly. Reza asks, what emerging trends do you think will shape the future of advertising?
Well, we've talked a little bit about this. I think advertising's got to understand that it's part of the entertainment industry. You know, we don't need another soft drink. We don't need another car. We don't need another, you know, let's be honest. You know, we are sort of overwhelmed with choice. So how do we stand out? How do we engage with people? You could argue, well, there should be less stuff. Well, I've already said you should do less advertising, you know, cut your budget. That's what I'm going. But I think we've got to think of ourselves as part of the entertainment industry. We're entertainment, and that's what people love. I mean, the Romans understood this, didn't they? Put on some games. We don't throw Christians to the lions anymore, but, you know, they understood it. You know, what have the Romans ever taught us? Like most things, actually.
It's true, actually. Yeah. Nilesh here says, we touched on this, but if there's any other points to add as well, what skills will the CMO of the future need? I guess similar to the previous question.
I think it's about, first of all, start using the word consumer. Start using the word audience. I've always thought there's, you know, words carry meanings. They're powerful. You know, there's a dictionary definition of something. Look it up. Consumer. It's not a very nice word, actually. Whereas audience is kind of implying there's a relationship. I'm giving you something that is going to engage you. So I think they've got to think of themselves in that way. Redefine who you are. Redefine the job. And if you're you're trying to be a brand leader, well, are you a brand? Right? Yeah. Okay. And are you leading? You know, it's a very simple phrase, brand leader. Are you leading? How are you leading? What are you doing? Are you creating a movement? Are you changing the way people feel or think? So those things become important.
Questions are powerful, aren't they? I mean, just the way you said, how are you leading?
Yes.
Is incredibly provocative question, because if I think back to most brands I've worked with, and they're probably following. If I were to kind of go through everything they're doing, following or leading, let's mark it all up.
Are you a brand follower or a brand leader?
There's a good audit, you know, do an audit of what you're doing.
What do you want us to be? You know, I'm here to be briefed.
Yeah.
Do you want to be a brand follower?
Yeah.
Or do you want to be a brand leader?
Yeah.
And of course, they'd all bristle and go, well, I want to be a brand leader. I'm a brand leader. You're not a brand leader because you've got a bigger share of the market, because somebody might be coming up behind you. So how do you stay ahead?
Yeah.
You do that, funny enough, look up the word in the dictionary, by leading.
And the interesting thing about leading is it's very uncomfortable internally, because, I mean, even like we find this is System 1, some of the things we do that are leading don't necessarily have universal support, or there's a debate about it. And because it's anything that takes you out of your comfort zone, well, surely we should be doing it like this.
Yeah.
And you're going to be doing it like that, feels uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Also, the left brain likes to say, oh, this is one of those, you know. So I recognise this.
Before.
I know what this is.
I know what to do with it.
Well, you get
can't
back,
deal with novelty.
Yeah. And you get back to that whole thing about risk, don't you? And I've always said, I won't go into that, don't use the word risk, because nobody wants to risk. I don't get in the morning and think, oh, I'm going to have a risky day today and have a risky breakfast, drive a risky car. And I used to say to clients when we were in that situation, so what word would I put in that? I used to say, this is exciting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, that's
a lovely framing.
That's have an exciting day, drive an exciting car. And that way, when you're arguing your case within an organisation, but this is exciting. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Back to Greg Harnach. I mentioned him earlier, but one of the quotes from the episode I did with him, which I love, is the biggest risk you can take is to be ignored. which is a lovely frame. Okay, last question. This one from Aidan. You famously introduced the idea of when others zag. What trend needs breaking today? Where would you zag?
Where would I zag today? Well, fun enough, we talked about it. I would be about engagement. I'm about humour. And actually, fun enough, I was thinking after listening to Orlando talk, if I was to start an advertising agency today, maybe I would call it something like Showtime. I'd just call it Showtime. And maybe that's the name of the agency. That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Is, it's showtime, folks. Yeah.
Because immediately that word strikes a performance,
entertainment, stepping up,
capturing an audience, the whole
outward looking, engaging.
It's got some swagger to it.
Yeah.
As well.
Performance in the best sense of the word, not the salesmanship sense. But
of course, sorry.
It's a shame they've stolen
the word performance has been entirely adopted.
Totally adopted by salesmanship. Yeah.
Although actually another adoption as well.
Yeah, sure.
I found out last week that apparently I'm the UK's #1 digital marketer, which is another word that's been adopted.
on your 150th.
Yes.
Yeah, breaking
God,
news.
a lot to
I know.
This is
celebrate
and,
this.
and you've got
Indeed.
Judy
This
Dench on.
next
Judy
week.
Dench is on the show.
You're on the show.
No,
Yeah, I don't know where I come in that, but I'm right down the
They
list.
let you in the building, John.
Let
as
me in
well,
the building.
which I know you were proud about getting into a WeWork.
We're in a WeWork, and I'm 80 years old, and I'm thinking, should I be allowed in? You know, should escort
you
me
in
to a back door?
we did
Would you
get you
stop
in.
coming in the front door, sir? Because I think it might
We
be
got you in
embarrassing.
eventually,
We
didn't
did. I snuck in. You know, but you know. Wonderful. Well, congratulations
thank
on
you.
that. I think that's a brilliant,
Yes.
brilliant thing.
Yes.
There you go. I'm going to frame
your
it.
milestone
now that
birthday as well.
I've been stepped down from Performance Marketer of the Year, which is, which apparently you can only have once. I didn't realise this till Robin emailed me yesterday to say, by the way, just let you know, you can only have this award once. So I feel a bit better about
Yes.
You can win more than one Oscar, can't you?
I know.
That's very
I'm
unfair.
going to feed this back to him.
Yeah,
I know.
I can have more
I was
than
very
one
proud of
BAFTA,
my
you know,
performance
come
marketing.
on. You know.
Because you were 24th most
26. I was 26.
26
You know, I'm now going to frame the number one digital marketer. That's going on LinkedIn
Love
this
it.
afternoon. Well, on that bombshell, thank you both. It's been
Absolute
the
pleasure.
best way to celebrate 150 episodes.
Well, thank you.
Also, 5 years at System One actually today
Yes.
as well. So 5
Yeah, so
years.
lots of
and
birthday.
turning
And
50,
the
so
big
I'm like-
5-0 next week. is
Indeed,
it?
I'm joining your exalted
cohort, yeah.
your cohort. Yeah, indeed.
Got to use the word cohort today. haven't we?
Indeed.
We didn't use that for
Who knew?
about half an hour, so get cohort in.
We're back in. All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thanks,
It's
John.
been a pleasure. Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show. So please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X at Uncensored CMO or on LinkedIn, where I'm under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.